Imagine this. You are a young German soldier in 1943. You've crossed deserts in North Africa, fought battles for Hitler's Reich, and heard endless propaganda about America. It's weak, divided, and too soft to fight. Then one day, you are captured. A train carries you deep into the heart of the United States. You expect barbed wire, starvation, and humiliation. Instead, when the doors open, you step into a world beyond imagination. Food so abundant that even prisoners eat better than soldiers. Farms so vast that a single American farmer produces more than entire German villages. Machines so powerful they do the work of hundreds of men and beyond the abundance. Something even more shocking. Humanity, guards who treat you with dignity, families who invite you to share meals. A nation so secure in its strength, it shows mercy to its enemies. For thousands of German POWs, captivity in America wasn't a story of defeat, it was a story of revelation. They arrived as enemies of democracy. But what they witnessed inside America's prison camps would shatter their beliefs, transform their identities, and send them back to Germany not as conquerors, but as architects of a new future. When the first trains carrying German prisoners of war rolled into America in 1943, nobody could have imagined the scale of what was about to unfold. Between 1943 and 1946, more than 371,000 German POWs would be held across the United States, spread out in over 500 camps covering nearly every state. From the deserts of Texas to the farmlands of Iowa, from the forests of Minnesota to the valleys of California, these camps became temporary homes for soldiers who just weeks earlier had been fighting for Hitler's Reich. Most of these men expected the worst. Nazi propaganda had told them that capture by the Americans meant starvation, torture, or even execution. Many stepped off the trains, bracing themselves for cruelty. What they encountered instead left them stunned. The camps were not perfect. Of course, they were prison camps, after all, but compared to the conditions they had endured on the front lines. For many, it felt like stepping into another world. Clean barracks, running water, central heating, regular meals, luxuries that even many American civilians didn't always enjoy during wartime rationing. It wasn't just the physical comforts that shocked them. It was the attitude. American guards enforced discipline, yes, but they also followed the Geneva Convention strictly. Prisoners were given the right to write letters home, to receive Red Cross parcels, to worship freely, and even to form camp orchestras, theater groups, and sports leagues. In some camps, soccer matches between POW teams drew hundreds of local spectators, but the real revelation was something deeper. These German soldiers had been raised to believe in the superiority of their own system, their own race, and their own nation. Yet here they were, thousands of miles from home, watching a so-called decadent democracy function with a strength and efficiency that their own empire could never match. For the United States, holding such a vast number of prisoners was both a challenge and an opportunity. America needed manpower. Millions of young men were overseas fighting, which left massive labor shortages back home. The POWs filled that gap. They harvested crops in the Midwest, cut lumber in the Northwest, and picked fruit in California. By the war's end, German prisoners had contributed the equivalent of 14 million man-days of labor, producing over $230 million worth of work in 1940s dollars. Yet while they worked, they also observed. They observed farms that could feed entire nations, factories that produced trucks, planes, and tanks on a scale unimaginable in Europe. Cities lit by electricity, buzzing with cars, brimming with abundance even during wartime rationing. What they saw challenged everything they had been taught. They had been told America was weak, chaotic, and racially divided. Instead, they saw a society that, despite its flaws, was richer, freer, and more powerful than anything they had ever known. And slowly, captivity became something unexpected, an education. These men were prisoners, yes, but in a strange way, they were also students. Students of democracy, of industry, of abundance. Their time in America would not just change them, it would change the very future of Germany itself. The first real shock came when the prisoners began working outside the wire dot in Texas cotton fields. German POWs watched American machinery harvest in a single day what would have taken entire villages back in Germany weeks to accomplish. A farmer, operating a single mechanized picker, could outproduce dozens of men with hand tools. The prisoners, many of whom had grown up on small European farms, were speechless. At first, they told themselves this was propaganda. Surely not all American farms were like this. But the evidence kept piling up. In Kansas, they saw grain elevators so tall and vast that they looked like fortresses, capable of storing more wheat than entire German provinces could produce. In Iowa, they saw endless rows of corn stretching beyond the horizon. The abundance of food itself was overwhelming. These were men who had grown used to scarcity, to strict rations, to seeing their families back home scrape by with substitute coffee made from acorns or bread mixed with sawdust. And yet here, in the heart of America, there seemed to be no shortage of anything. A POW named Karl-Heinz, Weber later recalled, "We were astonished. In Germany, even officers had little meat or butter. In America, even the prisoners ate like kings. We thought at first they were trying to deceive us. But day after day, it was the same. Full plates, hot meals, endless bread. For the first time in years, we were not hungry. It wasn't only farming that stunned them. When POWs were sent to work near factories, the shock was even greater. At the Campbell Soup plant in New Jersey, a single elderly woman managed machines that replaced dozens of workers. Conveyor belts, steam cookers, automatic fillers, everything was mechanized. STABSFELDWEBEL Ernst Wagner, who had worked in a German food plant before the war, couldn't believe his eyes. One woman, sipping coffee and listening to the radio, did the work of 50 Germans. This was no fairy tale, it was reality. Near Detroit, POWs, unloading coal, glimpsed the massive River Rouge automotive complex. Over 100,000 American workers produced jeeps, aircraft engines, and tanks in one place. The plant consumed more electricity in a single day than the entire city of Hamburg. Prisoners were stunned not just by the scale, but by the prosperity of ordinary workers. Parking lots were filled with cars, not officers' cars, not party officials' cars, but the cars of regular factory laborers. Some workers even owned to. The Germans could hardly believe it. In the Reich, even many officers had no car of their own. Oberrichter Franz Kellner remembered, "We thought the guards were mocking us." But it was true. In Germany, we had nothing like this. Here, even factory workers lived like lords. For many, these experiences triggered what American intelligence officers would later call ideological collapse syndrome. The more they saw, the less they could argue with reality. Fanatical Nazis who once boasted of Germany's superiority grew quiet. Newspapers printed inside the camps run by carefully chosen anti-Nazi editors shifted tone. Instead of defiant nationalism, articles began exploring democracy, economics, even post-war reconstruction. Then came the moment that broke many spirits for good. Christmas 1943 across the country. American churches, civic groups, and even Boy Scout troops sent 500,000 Christmas packages to German POWs. Cigarettes, candy, games, toiletries gifts for men who had tried to kill their sons and brothers only months earlier. Choirs came to sing German carols. Women baked cakes and cookies. Children made handmade Christmas cards. The prisoners were stunned. This was no propaganda, wrote Oberleutnant Walter Müller, whose brother had died in the bombing of Hamburg. These people truly treated us with kindness. Only a nation certain of victory and secure in its power could afford such generosity. The Christmas dinners themselves were overwhelming. Turkey, ham, potatoes, gravy, pies, ice cream, quantities of food many Germans hadn't seen since before the First World War. One POW Feldwebel Hansa remembered, "We ate until we were sick, and the guards told us this was not special. Every American family ate like this." We asked ourselves, if they feed prisoners this way, how must their soldiers eat? By early 1944, the shift was unmistakable. Thousands of prisoners were enrolling in educational programs. Universities sent books, professors gave lectures, even correspondence courses were available. POWs, who had believed Americans were cultural barbarians, found themselves studying English, mathematics, even atomic physics under the guidance of refugee scientists. One prisoner, physicist Dr. Wilhelm von Braun, later wrote, "American professors, many of them Jews who had fled Germany, taught us with generosity and patience. They shared knowledge with their enemies. We could not understand such a spirit, but it changed us. Camp theaters played Hollywood films, not propaganda, but real American movies. POWs watched Gone with the Wind and The Grapes of Wrath, shocked that a country would show its flaws so openly. In Germany, such honesty would mean death, one officer wrote. Here it was considered patriotic. The lesson was impossible to ignore. Democracy was not weakness. Openness was not chaos. In fact, these qualities made America stronger. The men who had once marched for Hitler began quietly admitting to each other everything they had been told was a lie, and every day in America provided more proof. By the spring of 1944, the cracks in Nazi ideology had become CHASMS. German prisoners across America worked in mills, canneries, and shipyards, watching a nation in full war production. At the Higgins Boat Factory in New Orleans, POWs unloaded steel destined to become the landing craft that would carry Allied soldiers onto the beaches of Normandy. They saw 700 boats being produced every month, more in 1 month than the German Navy could manage in an entire year. At Republic Steel in Ohio, they witnessed blast furnaces pouring out 10,000 tons of steel every single day. Endless trains delivered coal and iron ore, while workers complained about overtime even as they produced quantities that Germany couldn't achieve. With slave labor and double shifts, Oberrector Paul Hartmann, who had once worked at Krupp, admitted in disbelief, "They wasted more steel in spillage than we could produce in a week. I thought I knew industry." But this was beyond imagination. For many prisoners, this was the final blow. The numbers didn't lie. America's production was not only larger, it was limitless. Then came the harvest of 1944 in Kansas. Poe saw wheat fields stretching to the horizon, harvested by combines that devoured acres in minutes. Grain elevators swallowed mountains of wheat, more than Germany imported in an entire year. Unteroffizier Franz Weber, himself a farmer from East Prussia, confessed one American farmer with machines did the work of 100 German peasants. They could lose half their harvest and still have more than all of Europe combined. In California's Central Valley, orchards produced fruit on a scale Germans could not comprehend. Mountains of oranges were bulldozed into pits, not because of shortage, but because there was too much. 2 men from a starving continent. It was psychological torture. Gefreiter Otto Schultz remembered begging guards to send the fruit to their families in Germany. The guards sympathized but explained that shipping it was impossible. Schultz later wrote, "It was not cruelty, was proof of resources beyond limit. They destroyed food to keep prices stable while our families starved." June 6, 1944, brought the final collapse of Nazi hopes. News of the Normandy invasion reached the camps within days. Prisoners crowded into theaters to watch newsreels of the landings. They saw 6,000 ships, 11,000 aircraft, 150,000 men storming the beaches in a single day. They saw artificial harbors, endless supply convoys, a logistical miracle beyond comprehension. Oberfeldwebel Friedrich von Tauben wrote later, "We knew then it was over. Not only the war, but everything. We had challenged the greatest industrial power on earth with fairy tales and racial mythology. We sent horses against their trucks, rifles against their automatic weapons, courage against their inexhaustible resources. It was madness. But what broke them most wasn't just material superiority, was American humanity. When news reached a prisoner that his son had died in the bombing of Hamburg, the camp commander personally delivered the message and offered condolences. When another prisoner's wife wrote of struggling to feed their children, American church groups sent food packages to her in Germany enemy civilians. In a country still being bombed nightly, Feldwebel Otto recalled, "They said they were fighting Hitler, not Germans. At first, we thought it was propaganda, but then we saw it was real. They distinguished between people and regime. They treated us with humanity even while their own families were at risk. That was something we had never seen in our own system." Medical care drove the lesson home. German doctors were allowed to work alongside American staff. Prisoners received surgeries that in Germany would have been reserved for the elite. Even mental health Karen heard of in the Wehrmacht was provided. Dr. Friedrich Bauer, a POW physician, remembered, "When a prisoner attempted suicide, they gave him counseling, not punishment. When men broke down under stress, they were given therapy, not beatings." This was true strength, the confidence of a power that did not fear compassion. By March 1945, the secret re-education programs were producing astonishing results. More than 25,000 POWs had volunteered for democracy courses. Camp newspapers discussed constitutional government, free markets, and civil rights. Discussion groups debated Germany's future after the war. Even officers once loyal to Hitler began quietly planning how to rebuild their homeland. "We became missionaries for democracy," one former colonel later admitted, "not because of propaganda, but because we saw it work." The transformation grew so complete that American officials sometimes worried the Germans were becoming too enthusiastic. Some even asked to stay in the US permanently. Many would return in the 1950s as immigrants. Others married American women they met through camp correspondence programs, and then came April 1945, the final revelation, as American troops liberated concentration camps in Germany. The footage was shown to POWs in America. At first, many refused to believe it. They claimed it was Allied propaganda, but the evidence kept coming: newsreels, photographs, letters from home. What they saw shattered what little pride remained. Starved bodies stacked like cordwood, gas chambers. Mass graves, proof that the Reich they had fought for was not just defeated. But criminal highwayman Walter Schmidt expressed it best: "We thought we were warriors for a great cause. We discovered we were tools of criminals. We believed we were bringing civilization to others. Instead, we were the barbarians. The Americans we called weak and decadent showed us what civilization actually meant. For the men who had once shouted, 'Sieg Heil,' the collapse was complete. They were no longer Nazis. They were witnesses to both the strength and the humanity of a democratic society, and it changed them forever." When the war finally ended in May 1945, the German POWs in America were faced with a strange reality. They had lost the war. Their country lay in ruins, yet inside the barbed wire of their prison camps, life was safer, healthier, and in many ways freer than what awaited them back home by now. Many had come to see America not as the enemy, but as a teacher. Camp life, continued education programs expanded. Libraries stocked with American literature grew larger, and lectures on democracy drew bigger crowds. Some prisoners even enrolled in correspondence courses with U.S. universities while still behind barbed wire. But the end of the war also meant a ticking clock. These men would not remain in America forever. The Geneva Convention required the prisoners be repatriated once hostilities ended. For thousands of POWs, this prospect filled them with dread. Why dread? Because by 1945, their homeland was a wasteland. Cities like Dresden, Cologne, and Hamburg had been bombed into rubble. Families were starving. The Reich they had sacrificed so much for was gone, replaced by Allied occupation zones and uncertainty. To return meant stepping from comfort into chaos, and yet America prepared them carefully for that return. The re-education programs intensified, now openly teaching democratic values. Classes on free speech, civic responsibility, and economic opportunity replaced the old coded lessons. Camp newspapers featured editorials on rebuilding Germany without hate, without dictatorship. One POW, Lieutenant Hans Keller, remembered, "We came to America as Nazis. We left as Democrats. Not because we were forced, but because we had seen the alternative with our own eyes." But the transformation wasn't just ideological, was personal. Many POWs had built surprising relationships with local communities. Farmers who had relied on German labor sometimes invited prisoners to meals. Children brought them Christmas cards. Churches organized choirs where POW voices blended with Americans. In some small towns, it was said that locals wept when the prisoners were finally taken away. In Hearne, Texas, a farmer told the departing Germans, "You came here as enemies. You leave here as friends." For the prisoners, such kindness was unforgettable. Feldwebel Karl Meissner later wrote, "We expected hatred. Instead, we found humanity. We expected vengeance. Instead, we found mercy. It was not weakness. It was the greatest strength we had ever witnessed." By late 1945 and early 1946, the transports began. German POWs were loaded back onto ships. sent not directly home, but first to labor camps in Britain and France as part of post-war reparations. Yet even there, many carried with them the lessons of America. They shared stories of abundance, of fairness, of democracy in practice. It was a strange irony. Hitler had sent them to war to destroy democracy. Instead, they returned, carrying democracy within them, seeds that would help rebuild Germany from the ashes. Some spoke of their time in America with nostalgia for the rest of their lives. Others returned years later, this time not as prisoners but as immigrants. A surprising number even married American women they had corresponded with after the war, a testament to bonds formed under the most unlikely circumstances. Historians today call them the reluctant missionaries of democracy. Without planning it, America had turned its enemy soldiers into witnesses of its greatest strength, not just material power, but moral power. And for those POWs, the memories never faded. They remembered the factories, the fields, the wealth beyond imagination. They remembered the kindness of strangers, the freedom of speech in their camp newspapers, the fairness of a system that allowed even enemies to be treated with dignity. For them, America was not just a captor. It was a revelation, and it was a revelation they would carry home, spreading it through post-war Germany, shaping its rebirth as a democratic nation. The story of German POWs in America did not end when the war was over. In many ways, that's when its most important chapter began, between 1943 and 1946. Over 371,000 German soldiers lived in more than 500 camps scattered across 45 states. They harvested crops, cut lumber, built roads, and even studied in makeshift classrooms. They witnessed industrial might that dwarfed anything they had ever seen. And they experienced a society that treated them, its enemies, with a level of dignity that shook their very beliefs. Statistics alone tell a remarkable story. Fewer than 1% of POWs ever attempted escape, and not a single one succeeded permanently. Surveys showed that 95% rated their treatment as good or excellent. Thousands kept up correspondence with American families for decades. Over 5,000 even returned to settle in the United States after the war, choosing to build their futures in the land where their old worldviews had been dismantled. But beyond numbers, there were voices, first-hand memories that revealed the depth of transformation at a 1985 reunion in Texas. Hundreds of former POWs returned to the very soil where they had once been captives. Hans V., who had grown up in poverty in Germany, spoke of discovering running water, central heating, and abundant food for the first time in his life. Kurt Meyer recalled how Iowa farmers had welcomed him, not as an enemy, but as a young man far from home. And Hermann Gutz, once a Nazi soldier, delivered a speech that captured the heart of the transformation. We came to America as enemies, as Nazis, as believers in a lie. We left as friends, as Democrats, as men who had seen the truth. America showed us that strength comes not from conquest, but from production, not from hatred, but from diversity, not from tyranny, but from freedom. The Germany that rose from the ashes was built on lessons learned in American prison camps. We who came as conquerors left as students. The audience that day, Americans and Germans together, rose in a standing ovation. For a brief moment, former enemies were united not by war, but by shared humanity. Historians like Dr. Arnold Kramer have said it best. America won the propaganda war not with clever slogans, but with reality. Every meal, every electric light, every working toilet was proof that Nazism was a lie. The true weapon of the United States was not its bombs or tanks. but its ability to demonstrate what freedom and prosperity could achieve. The long-term impact was undeniable. The POWs who returned to Germany became farmers, teachers, engineers, and even politicians. They carried with them the memory of America's abundance and its democracy. And when West Germany rose from the ruins in the 1950s, it was shaped in part by the lessons those men had learned behind barbed wire in America. It is a profound irony. The men Hitler sent to destroy democracy became, in the end, some of its strongest witnesses. Their defeat became their education. Their captivity became their liberation. The trains that had brought them into captivity in 1943 carried warriors of the Third Reich. The ships that returned them to Germany in 1946 carried future citizens of a democratic nation. They had seen Americand, they would never be the same. Again, this is the untold victory of World War II, not won on battlefields, but in prison camps. Not by force, but by example. Not through destruction, but through demonstration. The story of German POWs in America is a reminder of a timeless truth. The greatest weapon any free society possesses is not its power to kill, but its power to inspire, and in the end, that was America's secret. It could outproduce its enemies, yes, but more importantly, it could transform its enemies into friends. Those who came as prisoners left as witnesses, carrying home the seeds of freedom, prosperity, and democracy. Seeds that would grow into the West Germany of the Cold War, the transatlantic alliance, and ultimately, a lasting peace between two former enemies. They had come to America as Nazis. They left as men who had seen the future, and they knew it worked.